everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com, and what a weird week it's been. I mean, just over the past sort of 7 to 10 days or so, we've had a Boneyard match, a Firefly Funhouse match, that match in Noah that went on for an hour and half of it was just a stare down. No, I'm not joking, that actually did happen. We've had that thing on NXT last night, which has just torn the internet's opinion completely in half. It's been so weird. We've had Drew McIntyre just slay Brock Lesnar in a few minutes, and we've had Braun Strowman just slay Goldberg in even less time. It's been very, very strange. So, Dynamite, in a weird way, despite being full of wacky characters and everything, was a bit of a return to normality in a way. It was a solid show. It was just solid. But how solid was it? In fact, how good was it? There's only one way to find out, and that is by assigning each individual segment a lovely individual grade. That's right, it's time for AEW Dynamite Graded. We get a cold open to the show, like Breaking Bad or something, but instead of Walter White, it's the Walter White of AEW, Jake the Snake Roberts. That analogy doesn't make sense because Walter White started off nice and then turned evil, whereas Jake's just pure evil to the core, isn't he? Jake's more like the Tuco of AEW. You know what? If you've never seen Breaking Bad, you're not going to get that. But if you've never seen Breaking Bad, watch it immediately. What else have you got to do? Jake compares the prospect of facing Lance Archer to inevitable failure, to jumping out of a plane without a parachute, and he turns this on Cody and basically mocks Cody. He's been mocking Cody for weeks now, in very flowery, eloquent language, of course, but it's been very effective nonetheless. Jake also shows great awareness of the rest of the roster and the rest of the AEW landscape. He says, we saw what Lance Archer did to Marco Stunt the other week. It was terrifying. We know that Cody might not even get through the TNT Championship tournament. He might get knocked out tonight by Shawn Spears. And I'm thinking, Jake's aware of everything else that's going on. And I'm not saying that, you know, we should expect that of veterans these days, but we should. I am saying that, actually. But sometimes, you know, you get the sense that, like for example, I don't think that Goldberg for a second really knows who Mustafa Ali or Akira Tozawa are and what's going on in their lives. Archer then targets Cody's reluctance to fire back, reluctance to trash talk back at Jake and Archer, and basically says, squeak up, Cody, implying that he's a mouse. God, the banter is a-flying early on Dynamite. This gets an A- grade, good promo from Jake, good way to start off the show. Jake always cuts good promos, doesn't he? He is historically, in fact, one of the best promos in the history of the business, but it was a good positioning of this segment right at the start of the show, and I liked it. Now we get our first match of the show, and I should mention that our co-commentator alongside Tony Schiavone, or should I say Tony Schiavone, is Chris Jericho, who's just having a blast for the whole show. A few times he almost corpses, he kind of loses it, but you can just tell he's having a great time. And when commentators are clearly having a great time, it's hard not to have a great time listening to them. The first match does indeed feature Lance Archer, and he's just squashing some poor guy. He's either called, I think he's called Eric Engels, but Jericho is just getting his name wrong about 3 or 4 times on commentary. So he's either Eric Engels, Eric Angel, Eric Engelson, Eric Engelski, probably. Ski was probably thrown in there at some point because we are talking about wrestlers on commentary here. But no, it was a good squash match, very effective, and of course, Lance Archer picks up the win. Lance Archer squash matches for me, I've realised in recent weeks, are a cut above anyone else's squash matches. I'm going to give this a B+. Lance Archer looked absolutely terrifying. Chris Jericho on commentary was just losing his mind about Lance Archer's strength and size and everything. And I think it's done really well in building up towards Archer versus Cody. So B+ is the grade. Good start to the show. Next up, another singles match, this time Dr. Britt Baker, DMD, taking on Hikaru Shida. Now let me just preface this by saying I am a big fan of Hikaru Shida. I think she's great in the ring, but she did that dropkick spot again. For those of you who don't know what I mean, right, last week Hikaru Shida whipped her opponent towards the ropes and did a dropkick and missed. And it's usually that spot where the opponent hooks the top rope, stops their momentum, and their opponent crashes and burns off their own missed dropkick, right? Classic stuff. But Shida did it last week and this week again as well, where she whipped her opponent towards the ropes and then immediately threw the dropkick, to the point where, like, if her opponent hadn't even hooked the top rope, she'd have still missed by a good few seconds. I don't know why she does it. Why do you do it, Shida? You're really good otherwise. A lot of this match, though, is about the improvisational skills and the good character work from Dr. Britt Baker. At one point she hits the Faymaster on Shida and then taunts Billy Gunn in the crowd. At one point she hits Shida with a super kick and then Shida goes all woozy and then Britt Baker gets down next to her and poses with their heads on each other's shoulders as if they're best friends. She's talking to Tony through the camera while Jericho just rips into him on commentary. She does her best to keep things fresh and unique and entertaining. But in terms of the action itself, at first, for the first half of this match, I'm not a big fan of it because some of the strikes aren't landing properly, things look a little bit loose, both women maybe look a little bit tired, and then at one point, Britt Baker catches a strike somewhere in the nose and is just gushing blood, and the tone of the match just totally flips. And from this point on, I mean, Britt just looks demented. She's grinning with blood all over her face and mouth and just looks evil, which Jericho hams up on commentary, of course. She's going for the lockjaw, but she takes one of the referee's gloves to put her hand inside Shida's mouth because she's got a bloody hand. She's a dentist. She doesn't want to, you know, it all works, but makes her look even more twisted and evil while trying to maintain her own sort of professional demeanor that she has, or at least thinks about herself in her mind. It's really, really good character stuff, but eventually it's not enough to get the win as Baker falls victim to a running knee strike from Hikaru Shida. I saw a lot of people raving about this online. I was less a fan of it than I think a lot of people were, just because of the first half of the match, because I thought the first half was, and I don't want to sound harsh, but it was quite a bit sloppy at times. But once that blood started, man, it was just one of those instances where the presence of blood, especially hard way accidental blood, can just ramp up the intensity of a match, and Britt Baker totally ran with it. She did really well. So on balance, didn't like the first half of the match, really enjoyed the second half. I'm gonna give it a B+, and I think that's a fair grade. But I know a lot of people are gonna be like, Jack, that's really harsh, what are you doing? But it's my show, and I'll take your comments into consideration for next time. Next up, and at first it felt like a bit of a time filler, but they made it entertaining and it was well edited. It's a video package hyping up the title match between Jon Moxley and Jake Hager. The video package really focuses on the differences between the two, so we've got Moxley being all rough and ready and from the streets, and he's sat in his own home gym, which is kind of just in his garage. We call it garage, by the way. If anyone from America's watching, I know you say garage, but we say garage, which is just a bit of an ugly sounding word, isn't it? Hager, by contrast, is in this ultra-professional, really slick gym. He's in his fight camp. He reveals that he had a Bellator fight lined up, which got cancelled because of the pandemic, and that means that, you know, he's going to be extra ready for Jon Moxley because he's been training for an MMA fight for the past few weeks. And we get his wife making a cameo as well, and she seems like a horrible blend of wholesome and really sinister too. She did great here. Very smilingly, Hager's wife says, well, you know, we're all winners in this family, and you know what I say, if he doesn't come home a winner, then he's not coming home at all. And I'm like, geez, she's a bit of a sinister lady, isn't she? But it was really effective. Hager says that he wants to be a double champion. He wants to be the Bellator heavyweight champion and the AEW world champion. Now, I don't think he's gonna do the second one because I think Moxley's gonna retain, but hopefully he'll make a good match out of it. As for the Bellator one, I don't know enough about Bellator, but looking at the lads that he's been put up against, I wouldn't bet against it. Is their heavyweight division any good? Someone let me know in the comments down below, because it doesn't look that good at the moment. Now, at first, I was gonna give this an A- grade, right? Because I thought this video package was really well done. And it's not just the video package itself, but I'm actually excited for this match because of AEW's overall investment in long-term storytelling. I mean, nobody really is complaining, saying, oh, it's just Dean Ambrose versus Jack Swagger. And that's because both guys have been allowed to totally reinvent themselves in AEW. But then a little bit later on in the show, we got another video package about the two and their title match coming up, and that was just a little bit too far for me. A little bit too much of that on this show, and that reduces the grade slightly. So together, both of those video packages get a B+, because the second one didn't really tell us anything new, whereas the first one was really well done. Next up, it's Kenny Omega and Michael Nakazawa taking on the best friends. Down, 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 down. Dun, dun, dun. I would like the best friends. There's a little bit of a teaser sort of angle before this match where Omega and Nakazawa are in some kind of trailer, presumably near the location where the event is taking place, and they're talking about how they're actually better best friends than the best friends, which you just don't say that. You just don't say that about Chucky T and Trenty B. They are overheard by Orange Cassidy, who's in, I think, the bathroom of their trailer for some reason. He just comes out and he's just like, oh no. Opens the door, there's the best friends, they come come in and they're like, why would you say that? And then eventually the name of Best Friends gets put on the line for this upcoming tag team match. And then the Best Friends storm out and Orange Cassidy goes back into the room that he was in instead of following them, which is a very Orange Cassidy thing to do. And I think just put the cherry on top of this lovely promo cake. This was a comedy match basically, which I think works in the overall context of the show, but as a segment itself, it wasn't the strongest thing on Dynamite. But I think it did serve its purpose. We get a lot of Michael Nakazawa baby oil stuff. He uses it, squirts it on his own chest to nullify Trent's chops, which are just sliding off Nakazawa's chest. He oils up the top rope and then slides, I think Trent or Chuck, along the top of it. And Jericho's like, they call that in Japan, it's like the hentai slide or something. And Tony's on commentary going, whoa, hentai. And I'm thinking, what goes on backstage in AEW? So it turns out that Nakazawa can just nullify one of the best tag teams in AEW with the use of baby oil. But one person he can't nullify is Orange Cassidy. Orange Cassidy gets in the ring, he's waiting for the hug, but Omega and Nakazawa turn the tide, they get in the ring, they go for the hug. Orange Cassidy slowly ducks and slowly walks out of the way, and Omega and Nakazawa slowly miss the hug, which is a bit odd. But then Nakazawa goes to squirt baby oil in Orange Cassidy's face, but he's wearing sunglasses. Jericho loves it on commentary, he's losing his mind. Cassidy takes off the sunglasses like, look what you've done. Nakazawa throws them out of the ring. So obviously Orange Cassidy, the living meme that he is, has another pair of sunglasses ready to go. And he's all right. And then in the later stages of the match, Nakazawa transforms into like Johnny Gargano. So the Best Friends hit a double team move on him, which I think is the end of the match, but it gets broken up. Then Trent just drops him with a pile driver, and I'm thinking, oh, bit overkill, but all right. 1, 2, Nakazawa kicks out of the pile driver. So the Best Friends then hit another double team move, the double stomp into I think it's the Dude Buster, and then they make the cover, and this time I was gonna make a joke there and say that Nakazawa kicks out. He doesn't, he stays down for that one. Thank God. This gets a B- from me. As I say, what it did for the show in terms of providing a bit of variety was more valuable than the match itself. And I actually found Tony and Jericho losing it on commentary funnier than a lot of the spots in this match, but it was still entertaining for what it was. Just don't expect it to be the best thing on the show or anything. Next up, we get a pre-recorded promo from Matt Hardy on the Inner Circle. He goes through all of them in turn, like the bloody Rock, if the Rock was really weird and thought he was a demigod possessing the body of a modern day man, but carrying with him the experience of millennia. If that was the Rock, this promo would be a Rock promo, but it's Matt Hardy. He goes through all of them. He says Sammy Guevara is not a Spanish god, he is a false god, and also probably can't even speak Spanish. He renames the Proud and Powerful to the Loud and Devourable, because he can't wait to bite them. He also says that Jake Hager has been transformed into a brainwashed Frankenstein's monster style henchman by Chris Jericho, and then he scolds and lambasts Chris Jericho for trying to recruit V1. The drone, I mean, not the old gimmick of Matt Hardy. Vanguard 1, in fact, Vanguard 1. How dare I forget that drone's name. He then calls Vanguard 1 down and says, bring that t-shirt that Chris Jericho gave to you when he tried to recruit you. And here comes Vanguard 1, but he's actually carrying Hardy's new merch, so bit of a shill there, but I like it. Good tactics, but Hardy goes, oh, it's wonderful, but where is Chris Jericho's shirt? And then we look over, well, first of all, Vanguard 1 says, a caption comes up that says fire, F-I-Y-A, and Matt Hardy's like, you're saying it's fire? And it says a dumpster fire, and he goes, oh yes, and then we look over, and Chris Jericho's merch is burning in a dumpster. So, you know, yeah. It's classic comedy. But no, I'm going to give this a B+. It was pretty enjoyable stuff. And I forgot the most important part. Matt Hardy has challenged Chris Jericho to come and face him at his compound in an elite deletion match. More cinematic goodness from the world of wrestling. And I've had a bit of overload on this sort of stuff recently, but we'll see where it goes. Next up, Brodie Lee gets out of his car and he has arrived at the venue and he is greeted by 3 of his Dark Order minions. 2 of them are in just like tracksuits with a mask on. One of them's dressed nicely in a shirt and tie, and Brodie Lee's pleased with that one because he looks like a professional, and when he's walking through the airport, people are going to know that he's something, whereas the other 2 are disgusting. It's another shot at Vince McMahon and his weird WWE dress code. But my thought is this. If I saw someone walking through an airport in a tracksuit, I wouldn't bat an eyelid. And if I saw someone walking through an airport in a black shirt with a tie, I again wouldn't bat an eyelid. In fact, I'd probably be going straight to my departure gate because I'm always scared that the plane's going to take off like 2 hours earlier than what it actually does I do that a lot in airports, especially since, you know, me and Sam missed our flight back from Tokyo, Sam. That's a day of my life I'm never going to get back, sat in that airport for 24 hours. I've never forgiven him for that. Brodie Lee does have a match after this. He says to the smartly dressed guy, who doesn't even have his top button done up, by the way, but he says, I'm impressed with you, I have an opportunity for you, and he takes him away. Then we get a match between Brodie Lee and a guy named Lee Johnson that I'm not too familiar with, but he looks pretty good until he gets utterly squashed by Brodie Lee. But he looked alright for the first few seconds. This gets a B- grade. It was the second squash match on the show of a very similar style, which has diminishing returns for me. And also, it was another Vince McMahon joke. And I know they probably recorded these in bulk and now they're putting them out 1 week at a time. But again, it's diminishing returns on that joke for me a little bit as the weeks go on. So B- is the grade. But on the positive side, Brodie Lee, as he was leaving the ring, stared down Marco Stunt in the front row. And that's an interesting next opponent for Brodie Lee. We saw how well Marco Stunt put over Lance Archer in that terrifying squash match, so I can't wait to see what these two will do once they face each other. And finally, the main event. It's a first round match in the TNT Championship Tournament pitting Cody against his most hated foe. Well, no, Cody's got a lot of foes. It's against Shawn Spears, right? But let's go through this actually. Cody's got MJF, he's got Jericho, he's got Lance Archer now on the horizon. A lot of people hate Cody at AEW. A lot of people do seem to hate that man. Jericho again is top notch on commentary in this match, which is quite a long match. It's quite fully developed. It gets a long stretch of the final bit of the show. But Jericho says at one point, see that logo on Shawn Spears' trunks? It's like the maple leaf sort of skull combination. And Jericho says, that's what Cody was asking for on his neck, but the tattoo artist was drunk. Sometimes burns are painful, Jericho, and that one was a little bit too accurate for my liking. Cody dominates the opening portion of this match. He gets a Cody cutter fairly early on, but Spears turns the tide, sliding a chair into the ring because, you know, it's a callback to when he nearly demolished Cody's head with a steel chair all those months ago. Spears gets in the ring, Cody's distracted by the chair, and Spears goes for him, but Cody's ready for it and he turns the tide, but it spills to the outside a bit later on, and Shawn Spears turns the tide back and backdrops Cody onto a guardrail that's propped up diagonally against the apron. That looks nasty. A table gets involved as well, not in an overt, this is going to get you DQ WWE way, more in a I'll let this slide kind of way, like New Japan sort of style. It gets involved, but they leave it on the outside of the ring for now. A little bit later on, Brandi gets up on the apron. Shawn Spears considers pushing her off through that table. He doesn't do it. Cody charges at him. Spears moves. Cody nearly sends his own wife through the table. Shades of Triple H doing that to Stephanie McMahon at WrestleMania 32, but it doesn't happen. He stops himself short. Brandi hops down, and then Shawn Spears just ends Cody with a Death Valley driver over the top rope to the outside of the ring through that table. Cody almost gets counted out, but he beats the count at 9 and gets back in the ring. So Spears goes for another Death Valley driver. Cody slips out and reverses it into the crossroads. He holds on into a second crossroads, and Shawn Spears kicks out. So then we get a very unique finish, and one that personally I didn't like that much, but it wasn't grossly offensive or anything. I just didn't quite enjoy it that much. Cody goes for the figure 4, and Shawn Spears gets pinned with his shoulders to the mat while in the figure 4 because he's in so much pain he doesn't remember to kick out. Personally, that finish wasn't really for me. I get it when the pain is too much and you're about to pass out and you're down on the mat and then you spring back to life and get a shoulder up at 2 and continue fighting the figure 4. I get that spot. But that's not what Spears was doing here. He wasn't nearly passed out from the pain. He was wiggling his arms. He was clearly in a lot of pain. And I think if you're in a lot of pain, you wouldn't be lying with your shoulders clean on the mat. You'd be thrashing about. And then when the pain got too much and you're about to pass out, maybe then you'd fall back onto the canvas. That's just my own sense of wrestling logic in my head. But then again, maybe I'm being too harsh because this week we've seen all wrestling logic that we once knew and loved just torn asunder and thrown to the wind. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, some of it was genuinely very entertaining. I wanted to give this an A- so badly, but I have to give another B+ out on this week's Dynamite. It was just a finish. It just wasn't for me for reasons I've already explained. But a great effort by both men, a tremendous main event match apart from that finish, and Cody progresses in the TNT Championship Tournament. Overall, I'm going to give this Dynamite a B+ grade. I thought it was a nice variety show. Not the most spectacular Dynamite we've ever seen, but it kept things fresh and moving all the way throughout the 2-hour duration. So we had a comedy match, we had squash matches, we had that big long main event with a unique finish, we had video packages. They did a good job of making everything a bit of a mixture and keeping everything entertaining and keeping things moving. And that's what you want to see. Again, not as wacky as most of the stuff we've seen over the past week or so, but Dynamite are still pretty much on the tracks, on the rails. That's a saying, isn't it? Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.